On the 22nd of June 2025, Diogo Jota stood at the altar and married the woman he'd loved since he was a teenager. 11 days later, he was gone. Not from illness, not from age. From a burst tire, on a dark road in northern Spain, at midnight, in a car he never should have been driving that night in the first place. He wasn't supposed to be on that road at all. Diogo Jota was supposed to be on a plane. But doctors had just performed a small procedure on his lung, and they told him not to fly. So, instead of a 2-hour flight from Portugal to England, he chose a car. Then a ferry, a journey that would take almost a full day longer, just so he could report back to Liverpool for pre-season on time. That single medical precaution, that one piece of careful, responsible advice, is what put him behind the wheel of a Lamborghini on the A52 highway in the early hours of July 3rd. He never made it to the ferry. In the car with him was his younger brother, Andre Silva, 25 years old, a footballer in his own right, following in Diogo's footsteps just like he always had since they were kids, kicking a ball around the streets of Gondomar. Neither of them made it home. Today marks exactly 1 year since that night. 1 year since a Premier League champion, a World Cup dreamer, a husband of 11 days, and a father of 3 young children, closed his eyes for the last time. This is the story of Diogo Jota, not just how he died, but how he lived, why an entire footballing world stopped to grieve him, and why, 365 days later, Liverpool fans still sing his name in the 20th minute of every single game, because his shirt number was 20. Stay with me. This is going to be one of the hardest and most important stories I've ever told. Diogo José Teixeira da Silva was born on the 4th of December, 1996 in the parish of Massarelos in Porto, Portugal. But it was in Gondomar, a working-class town on the edge of the city, where he actually grew up, where the streets, the local pitches, and one small academy called Gondomar Sport Club shaped the player and the person he would become. He wasn't a golden child prodigy. He wasn't the kid every scout circled on a whiteboard. In fact, for most of his boyhood, Diogo was small, genuinely small, physically behind other kids his age, the kind of player that bigger academies looked past without a second glance. Several major clubs rejected him outright because of his frame. Imagine that one of the most clinical forwards of his generation, and as a child, nobody wanted him. He kept playing anyway. Between the ages of 9 and 17, Gondomar SC was his footballing home, the place where he fell in love with the game before the world ever knew his name. Years later, in 2022, that same academy would rename itself in his honor, a full-circle moment that meant the world to him. His path to professional football wasn't glamorous. In 2013, Paços de Ferreira's youth setup gave him a chance. A year later, on the 19th of October, 2014, a teenage Diogo Jota made his senior debut, starting in a 4-0 win in the Portuguese Cup. It should have been a triumphant start. Instead, that same season, he was pulled from training for a full month after doctors discovered a heart condition, a terrifying diagnosis for a young athlete just trying to break through. He came back. He always came back. By February 2015, he'd made his first appearance in Portugal's top flight, coming off the bench in a 2-2 draw. It wasn't flashy. It wasn't a viral moment. It was just a quiet, determined kid from Gondomar, inching his way toward a dream that most people around him didn't believe was realistic. Nobody watching that 18-year-old sub in 2015 could have imagined he'd one day lift the Premier League trophy at Anfield. But that's exactly where this story is headed. From Paços de Ferreira, the trajectory of Diogo Jota's career accelerated fast, even if the football world outside Portugal barely noticed at first. In 2016, La Liga giants Atletico Madrid signed him a huge move on paper for a player who, just 2 years earlier, had been fighting for minutes in the Portuguese second tier. But Atletico didn't quite know what to do with him. Instead of throwing him straight into one of the most competitive squads in Europe, they loaned him back to Portugal, to Porto, for the 2016 season. Then, in 2017, his path took a turn that would define the next chapter of his career, a loan to Wolverhampton Wanderers, then playing in England's second division, the Championship. This is the part of the story people forget. Before Diogo Jota was a Premier League title winner, He was a foreign 20-year-old adjusting to a rainy English town, playing championship football, trying to prove himself all over again in a country where nobody outside serious football circles knew his name. He didn't just prove himself, he obliterated expectations. Jota was instrumental in dragging Wolves out of the Championship and into the Premier League, and the club made the loan permanent, signing him in 2018 for a reported €14 million. Over the following 2 seasons, he became one of the most electric attacking players outside the traditional Big Six sharp movement, ice-cold finishing, and a work rate that never let up, even when he was exhausted. Bigger clubs started paying attention. In 2020, Liverpool, the reigning European and soon-to-be Premier League champions under Jurgen Klopp, paid roughly £41 million to bring him to Anfield. For a player who, 6 years earlier, had been recovering from a heart scare in Portugal's lower leagues, this was the summit, the absolute peak of what professional football could offer. But Jota wasn't just there to make up the numbers in Klopp's already stacked front line of Salah, Mane, and Firmino. He was there to fight for a place, and fight he did. Off the pitch, there was another side to him almost nobody outside football knew about. Diogo was a serious, competitive gamer. In February 2021, he was ranked the #1 player in the world on FIFA 21's Champions Leaderboard. During COVID lockdowns, he even competed in a Premier League FIFA Invitational tournament and beat his own future Liverpool teammate, Trent Alexander-Arnold, in the final. He had his own esports organization and streamed regularly on Twitch. A footballer's footballer and a gamer's gamer, all in one 20-something from Gondomar. Diogo Jota's 5 seasons at Liverpool weren't defined by superstar headlines the way Salah's or Van Dijk's were. He was something different, the kind of player teammates and coaches trusted more than the highlight reels ever gave him credit for. Reliable, clinical, selfless, the type of forward who could play through the middle, out wide, or as an impact substitute and somehow make it look natural every single time. Across 182 appearances for Liverpool, he scored 65 goals. He won the Premier League title, the FA Cup, and 2 EFL Cups. But numbers alone don't capture what he meant to that dressing room. Ask any teammate, and the word that comes up again and again isn't talented. It's humble, quiet, a family man. Jamie Carragher, the Liverpool legend turned pundit, once described him as exactly that. Someone who lived close to the club's other stars, but genuinely kept to himself, dedicated entirely to his wife and children, rather than the spotlight that came with being a Premier League and Champions League footballer. On the international stage, Jota wore Portugal's colors with the same quiet intensity. He was part of the Portugal squad that won the UEFA Nations League, not once, but twice. First in 2019 and again in June 2025, just weeks before his death. Nearly 50 caps for his country, playing alongside and learning from Cristiano Ronaldo, a countryman who would later call Jota's death something that simply does not make sense. Then came 2025, the best year of his professional life, arriving just months before the worst day of it. In May, Liverpool were crowned Premier League champions, matching the English record for top-flight titles. Jota played a real role in that triumph. 26 league appearances, 6 goals, 4 assists. A month later, in June, he lifted the Nations League trophy with Portugal. His career, at 28 years old, was accelerating toward a peak most players only dream about. And then, on the 22nd of June, 2025, he married Ruth Cardoso, his long-term partner, the mother of his 3 children, the woman who had been by his side since long before any of the trophies arrived. She posted a photo from their wedding with a caption that read simply, "Yes to forever." 11 days later, forever ran out. To understand why Diogo Jota was even on that road, you have to understand one small, almost forgettable medical detail. In the days before his death, he'd undergone a minor lung procedure. Nothing career-threatening, nothing that made headlines. But doctors advised him not to fly for a period of time afterward. For most people, that would mean postponing a trip. For a professional athlete under contract, obligated to report for Liverpool's preseason training on schedule, it meant finding another way to get from Portugal to England. So Jota made a plan. Drive from Portugal into Spain, then take a ferry from the northern Spanish city of Santander across to England, avoiding the flight entirely. His brother, Andre Silva, came with him. 25 years old, a professional footballer himself, playing for Penafiel in Portugal's second division. The two brothers had done everything together since childhood. Same academy, same hometown streets, same sport, chasing versions of the same dream just a few years apart. On this trip, they were simply traveling companions, brothers on a long overnight drive toward a ferry port. They never got there. At approximately 12:30 in the morning, local time, on the 3rd of July, 2025, their car, a Lamborghini, was traveling on the A52 highway near the town of Cernadilla, in the Zamora province of northwestern Spain, close to the Portuguese border. According to Spain's Guardia Civil, the vehicle suffered a tire blowout while overtaking another car. It veered off the road, struck a guardrail, and burst into flames. Investigators would later note the road conditions in that area were poor. Two Portuguese lorry drivers who passed the car minutes before the crash insisted Jota had not been speeding, that the road itself, not reckless driving, was to blame. Nearly a year later, in April 2026, a Spanish court formally closed the case, ruling that no criminal proceedings would follow. It was, in the end, officially and legally, simply an accident. A tire, a dark, unfamiliar road, and unbearably bad luck. Neither brother survived. They were pronounced dead at the scene. Diogo Jota was 28 years old. News of Diogo Jota's death broke early on the morning of July 3rd, and within hours, the reaction wasn't just sadness, it was disbelief. This wasn't a player who'd battled illness for months, or a veteran whose body had finally given out after a long career. This was a 28-year-old Premier League champion, married less than 2 weeks earlier, father of 3 young children, who by every measure should have had decades of life still ahead of him. Liverpool Football Club released a short statement saying simply that the club was devastated and asking for privacy for the Jota and Silva families as they tried to process an unimaginable loss. Fans didn't wait for permission to grieve publicly. Within hours, flowers, scarves, and shirts bearing Jota's number 20 began piling up outside Anfield, a spontaneous, overwhelming outpouring from a fan base that clearly saw him as more than just a squad player. Tributes poured in from every corner of football. Cristiano Ronaldo, his Portugal teammate, wrote that his compatriot's death simply did not make sense and sent strength to Jota's wife and children. Liverpool manager Arne Slot, visibly shaken, said the club would remember Jota's goals, sing his song, and never forget him as a person first. Former teammate Darwin Núñez said there were no words of comfort for that much pain, remembering Jota by his smile. Beyond football, the tributes kept coming. Britain's Prince William, patron of the Football Association, said he was deeply saddened and that his thoughts were with the family. Portugal's president called Jota's death a tragedy for a young man who had his whole future ahead of him. Icelandic singer Lofi, performing a concert in Liverpool that same night, paused to sing "You'll Never Walk Alone" in his memory. The next day, at their reunion tour opener in Cardiff, the band Oasis displayed Jota's image on stage while performing "Live Forever," a moment that hit fans across the country hard. A wake was held on July 4th in Gondomar, the town where it had all begun for him. Hundreds gathered family, friends, teammates, and public figures, including Portugal's prime minister and president. The funeral followed the next morning at the local parish church. Liverpool teammates Virgil van Dijk and Andy Robertson carried floral tributes for the brothers. Ruben Neves, Jota's former Wolves and Portugal teammate, served as a pallbearer. Diogo Jota and Andre Silva were laid to rest, side by side, in a cemetery beside the church, where Diogo had once been a boy who nobody thought would make it. A year later, the number 20 at Liverpool means something different than it used to. The club retired his shirt in his honor. Every single home game, in the 20th minute, Anfield rises to sing his name, not as a ritual out of obligation, but because supporters genuinely want to. It's become one of the most emotional moments in English football, a stadium of tens of thousands pausing mid-match to remember a man many of them never personally met, but who somehow felt like one of their own. Arne Slot has spoken about it more than once, how proud he is of the way the club, the players, and the fans have handled the year since. Not perfectly, not painlessly, but with a consistency of respect that speaks to exactly how much Jota meant inside that dressing room. Every game in the 20th minute, the fans sing for him. Slot said, "I think I'm proud of how everyone has handled the situation." What makes this story land so hard isn't just the football, It's the timing of it all. Diogo Jota didn't die in obscurity, forgotten, past his prime. He died at the absolute peak of everything. A Premier League champion, a Nations League champion, a newlywed, a father of 3, 28 years old with every reason in the world to believe the best chapters of his life were still ahead of him. He wasn't reckless that night. He wasn't speeding for thrills. He was doing exactly what a responsible professional does following his doctor's advice, choosing the safer, slower route instead of getting on a plane, trying to make it back to work on time for the people counting on him. And it was that responsible decision, that ordinary act of doing the right thing, that put him on a stretch of road with a tire that gave out at the worst possible moment. There's no clean lesson in a story like this, no tidy moral that makes it make sense, because as Cristiano Ronaldo said, it simply doesn't. What there is, instead, is a reminder, the kind that hits differently when it happens to someone that young, that in love, that close to living the life he'd worked his entire childhood to build. Ruth Cardoso lost her husband 11 days after her wedding. 3 children lost their father before most of them are old enough to fully understand what that means. A mother and father in Gondomar lost 2 sons in the same instant, not one. Today, the 3rd of July, 2026, marks exactly 1 year since that night on the A52. Liverpool have played a full season since then, a season where his teammates carried his memory onto every pitch they stepped on, where a stadium full of strangers learned to sing his name like it was second nature, where a young academy in Gondomar that carries his name kept producing the next generation of kids who, just like him, might get overlooked at first. If there's a reason to tell this story today, a year on, it isn't to relive the tragedy for its own sake. It's to remember the whole arc of it, the undersized kid from Gondomar that bigger clubs turned away, the heart scare that could have ended everything before it started, the loan spells and the quiet grinding years in the championship, the 5 seasons of trophies at Anfield, the wedding, and yes, the ending nobody saw coming. Diogo Jota's story isn't just a cautionary tale about a tragic accident. It's a story about persistence, about a level of humility that made him beloved by teammates who could have easily overlooked a squad player in a star-studded attack, and about how quickly everything a title, a marriage, a family, a life can be interrupted. If this video meant something to you, if it reminded you why football, at its best, is about more than results on a scoreboard, do me a favor. Drop a comment with your favorite Diogo Jota memory, a goal, a moment, anything. Subscribe if you want more stories like this one, told properly, with the respect they deserve. And if you're a Liverpool fan, or just someone who believes in second chances and hard work, hit that like button before you go. Diogo José Teixeira da Silva, 4 de dezembro de 1996, 3 de julho de 2025. Ace. Number 20. Forever remembered, never forgotten. Rest in peace, Diogo and Andre.